Hi, Eric Lanask here at the Rio in Las Vegas. We are at ITEXPO, and with me is Ross Buntrock from Arent Fox. Ross, thanks for joining me.
Thanks for having me.
So, maybe as a way of introduction, Arent Fox is a law firm. Tell me about the practice and who you deal with.
Sure. I'm the head of our communications, mobile, and technology practice. I'm headquartered in Washington, D.C. We also have an office in San Francisco, Los Angeles, and New York, so I'm kind of back and forth between DC and San Francisco. My clients are kind of cover the waterfront in terms of carriers, network operators, startups doing mobile health startups, people who are interested in the spectrum auctions coming up. So yeah, we have a broad range of clients who are doing a lot of interesting things throughout the communication space.
Well, Washington, D.C. certainly the perfect place to be headquartered for any telecom-related law firm.
Definitely.
In the thick of it, certainly with regards to any legislation. What are what are the biggest hot topics right now that you're seeing some motion around in terms of legislation?
Sure. Legislatively, I guess it's been interesting because it's an election year and because we have a divided Congress. Almost nothing's been happening legislatively. There's been talk of a Communications Act rewrite, and the two chairmen of that House committee, the House committees involving that, are kind of gearing up and gathering information about a potential rewrite, which could happen in the next few years. But I don't think anybody's really holding their breath to see what's happening there. There's been some legislation around the kind of the NSA reform issue. And that's actually something that might move. If you pick up the paper this morning, there's discussion around some disagreement among some of the big kind of giant stakeholders as to the contents of that legislation. Another big thing that's going on is the issue around net neutrality, which everybody's cast their own kind of idea about what net neutrality means, but obviously the FCC is reacting to the DC Circuit decision that gutted not gutted. I mean, there's debate about what that decision really means, but net neutrality and what the FCC is going to do to address that decision has been a huge topic. And Chairman Wheeler's got his plate full in dealing with that. The president came out about a week ago, kind of suggesting that he's supportive of kind of a stronger kind of net neutrality or open internet initiative than perhaps the carriers would like. He seemed to be lining up with the likes of Netflix and others who don't want to have kind of a fast lane rule adopted that allows kind of tiered pricing for access. So yeah, a lot going on at the FCC this year.
The net neutrality question that is I think a scenario where nobody's going to ultimately win. Somebody's always going to be happy, is what I mean. So the decisions are going to come down, and somebody's always going to be displeased.
Sure, I don't disagree that that's probably the likely outcome, and I think the deals that Netflix and others have struck with Comcast and Verizon are going to be used to say, gosh, look, this kind of tiered fast lane thing is working, and even though Netflix says that's not the case, and other there's a lot of opposition to that, especially kind of in the startup community, because it does mean that, if Comcast has a competing product or, some other kind of technology that they want you to use instead of a startup's technology, then they could keep you off. And so yeah, there's big implications for how this all shakes out.
So, with these discussions around net neutrality, is the focus on is it on the carriers, or is it on the the alternative providers or content providers? How much of what the end user, the customer, the subscriber wants or needs is taken into account?
Well, I mean, this is one of those hot button issues that actually has garnered huge public participation in this docket, because there have been appeals by some of the big tech companies to get people involved. But at the end of the day, it really is going to be decided largely based on proposals, I think, put forward by the carriers and by some of the the edge developers, the Amazons, the Netflix, the people who are the biggest players in this realm. But I think this is one of those, again, those issues that is really resonated with consumers, even though they may not understand all the nuances and the nitty gritty of
Sure.
the rules that are being proposed. That what the bottom line that they're being told is that basically you're not going to be able to access necessarily the content, in the way that you want to access
Right.
the content that you choose to access. So, yeah, that resonates with people. There's people. The survey came out. People would rather give up sex for 3 months and not have internet access. So that's kind of like where we are in this debate.
Well, I think that says something. Um, Big topic lately also, just the connected world, connected devices, Internet of Things, Internet of Everything, sort of choose your term, wearable technology. That raises a lot of data protection, privacy issues. I imagine those have got to be on the forefront of your agenda as well.
Sure, yeah, we do a lot of counseling in terms of helping people put together privacy policies, making sure that their technology, doing audits of technology. I mean, I'm not an engineer. We work with engineers as needed, but to help people understand that there's certain legal obligations that could arise with regard to certain of these technologies. Again, going back to kind of the wearables and location. There's issues around HIPAA potentially when you're transmitting healthcare data or patient information.
Sure.
And so, yeah, there's a whole kind of minefield of issues that comes into play, whether it's federal, state, or other rules that apply to some of these things potentially. And that's the thing that I find a lot is that when I'm visiting clients and potential clients in Silicon Valley and San Francisco, everyone's very focused on their great new idea and this great piece of technology, and it is in fact great, but they're not really understanding or even thinking about kind of the regulatory aspects of what some of these things are doing or how it might be argued by a regulator that this is covered by this statute, this rule. So yeah, we try to help flag those kinds of issues.
And this has got to be a great time to be in a business like yours with just the countless startups that are popping up left and right, around these new concepts and ideas.
Yeah, no, there's definitely. I mean, it's a different world when you go to San Francisco and in the Valley, and
Yeah.
it's a different kind of energy, and there's a lot of exciting things happening there. So yeah, there's a lot of opportunity, and I think there's going to be some of these guys are going to do really well, and some are going to be also rans, but yeah, it's fun.
Well, so aside from net neutrality and data protection, privacy, are there any other sort of hot button topics that you're finding yourself addressing?
We're dealing a little bit with issues around the reform of the Universal Service Program.
Okay.
And so again, probably not something that the average person cares that much about, but it's a multi-billion-dollar fund that is used to connect, among other things, schools and libraries, and to basically subsidize kind of the provision of access to traditionally been telephony, and now there's a big push to make that a subsidy that's available for broadband access. So that's been the reform of that program has been a big agenda item for the last few years, and Chairman Wheeler's again doing a lot in that realm. The biggest thing that actually just happened the other day was a vote on the $1 billion Wi-Fi fund. The other big issue that the FCC is working on that we've been dealing with a little bit is the text to 911 rules.
Sure.
So that's
a lot of attention on that lately. Yeah.
Yeah. So they finally got that item voted on, and the big four carriers had already agreed to allow text 911, and they had to have that ready in May of this year. The new order applies the obligation to some of the smaller wireless carriers, and then some other kind of just pure text companies. So it's been a big deal. There's been a lot of kind of controversy around it, at least on the commission, as to whether this is something that's ready for prime time. As to whether the people who are operating the 911 public safety answering points are ready for this. So yeah.
Well, one could make the argument that this really should be at the forefront of the initiatives because something goes wrong with any 911 situation, it's going to be at the forefront of the news.
Yep. No, that was kind of the big point that was made by Commissioner Pai, and he's pretty concerned about just that kind of a scenario. Is that something in the chain of the communication goes wrong, and you've got a worse crisis in your hands.
Yeah.
So
Good. Well, Ross, thank you so much for being on the program
my
with
pleasure.
us today.
Thanks so much. Appreciate it.